Do you see it?
Well, I guess, yeah. So I guess for me, the fixed line rod for nymphing, I like because I can get a longer rod that is lighter weight. So I just don't get tired. I also really enjoy the casting aesthetic of a fixed line rod, and that's something I've learned from fishing Tenkara methods. Um, but ultimately, I'll tell you, I don't think that there is a list of advantages to a fixed line rod and a list of specific advantages to a rod and reel. But like I said earlier, I think it really is all dependent on who's holding that rod and their skill level. Because a rod and reel guy can do just about anything that I can do, you know, if not more. And, you know, an exceedingly skilled rod and reel guy can do, or, you know, Oni can do anything that a rod and reel guy can do and maybe a little bit more. So, you know, it's really all about the skill that the instrument's employed with.
You know, one reason I kind of got more into the rod and reel stuff this year and wanted to improve my skills is I was out with a guy and I watched him doing it. And some of the stuff I thought you couldn't do with a rod and reel, he was doing, you know, like Rob says, if you didn't see the reel, you would think he was fishing a Tenkara rod. You know, the way he was fishing at a distance with the complete line held off the water, the accurate casting that he was doing with that was amazing. Completely different skill set, you know, than with a Tenkara rod. He had to cast a completely different way, but he did it and he made it look, you know, he made it look easy, and it was not easy. So it's a totally different way of fishing, but yeah, you can do all, you know, the same kinds of things. And then if I heard your question correctly, you were talking about maybe what you would look for in a fixed, like in a Tenkara rod to do nymphing. Was that correct, Luong?
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure, but that's the question. The question is the characteristic of the fixed line for nymphing. So what is, yeah, maybe that compare with the fly rod, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't fished every fixed line rod, obviously, so I can't speak to all of them. I would say that I've used a lot of different ones to nymph with successfully, and a few that I didn't. And the ones that I really didn't like, and the reason I didn't like them and they didn't work for me, is I couldn't hook fish. So like that's when I knew it wasn't good for fixed line nymphing, is I was just knocking fish after fish. You know, I would see the strike and I could not hook the fish because the one rod in particular was a Keiru rod, and it was like a bait rod. So in that case, you're not hooking the fish is completely differently when the fish eats the bait, right? A really soft tip is what you need, because the fish eats the bait, it doesn't feel the rod, and you don't have to worry about him spitting the bait out, right? So in that case, I couldn't hook a fish with it, so I knew it was not a good nymphing rod. And there's a couple other rods that I used, you know, a Nyshin rod that was great for Tenkara. It was just so soft, though, it's just not good for nymphing. So I guess the short answer is I would stay away from rods that are super, super soft, and at least in my experience. Yeah. And I mean, oh, go ahead, Rob.
It's an interesting thing too, because there's a couple of rod and reel manufacturers that have approached some of us in the Tenkara community, trying to make their competition rods or trying to mimic the bend of some of our Tenkara rods with their competition rod and reel nymphing rods. You know, which is an interesting thing. You know, softness and stiffness is on a spectrum, and I agree with Anthony. You know, I think if you in the Tenkara spectrum, it's really easy, and the Keiru spectrum, it's really easy to go too soft. You know, and when you go too soft, a lot of times you can lose the ability to hook set, particularly at depth. On the flip side of that, if you're talking about fishing rod and reel, it's pretty easy to go stiffer. And a lot of the guys that are fishing, you know, these nymphing techniques in competition are using 2-weight rods, you know, because, you know, they can get a little bit more play in the rod. And that's more important, I think, in you know, just differences in the construct of those two spectrums of rods right now. Hasn't always been that way. But, you know, rod and reel companies for years and years and years, decades now, have been pushing for stiffer, you know, pushing rods stiffer and stiffer. And that's now changing. You know, all these things go through cycles. But in general, yeah, I agree with Anthony. I think if you're talking about the fixed line arena, it's easy to go too soft. You don't want a broomstick either. You know, you want to be able to feel the fish. You want to be able to cast. The better you are at casting, the more you want to be able to use that rod. So the more you stay away from broomsticks. You know, a broomstick might feel great in the beginning, but you know, you want to liberate it as you get a little bit more advanced in your fishing, I think. There are a few, just real quick, I'm plugging off questions here every once in a while. Daniela, oh yeah, go ahead.
Rob, 11.5 to 13 feet is what I use for my nymphing rods. That's another characteristic of it, so I would just add that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.